Go eat with the dogs outside." My wife shoved me out of the gala. In the dark, the global CEO she was trying to impress found me. He grabbed my hand. "You don't remember, but thank you for paying my college years ago. Should I sign her father's contract?" A wave of satisfaction washed over me. I shook my head. "Tear it up." When my wife saw him do it, she screamed in horror. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Bruce, and I'm 63 years old. Tonight, at the most important business gala of my wife's career, she made me eat with the dogs. I should have seen it coming. For the past 14 years of our marriage, Erin had been slowly chipping away at whatever dignity I had left. But tonight was different. Tonight she crossed a line I never imagined she would cross, in front of 200 of the most powerful people in the city. The grand ballroom of the Hotel Meridian sparkled like something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the marble floor, and the scent of white roses filled the air with an almost suffocating sweetness. I stood near the bar in my only decent suit, a navy blue number I'd bought at a discount store 3 years ago. The fabric was starting to show its age, much like myself, but it was clean and pressed. I'd made sure of that. Erin glided through the crowd in her $5,000 emerald gown, her blonde hair swept up in an elaborate style that had cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She moved with the confidence of someone who belonged in this world, someone who had never known what it felt like to count pennies or eat ramen noodles for dinner 3 nights in a row. "Bruce, darling," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she needed me to play my role. I walked over, careful not to bump into any of the important guests. "Could you be a dear and refill my wine glass, and perhaps get Mr. Chen something stronger than that sparkling water?" Marcus Chen. I recognized the name from the guest list Erin had been obsessing over for weeks. He was the global CEO of Transcendent Industries, a company worth billions. Erin's father desperately needed Chen to sign a $3 million contract that would save his struggling manufacturing business. Everything tonight depended on impressing this man. I looked at Marcus Chen as I approached with the drinks. He was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 40s, with kind eyes and an expensive watch that caught the light as he moved his hand. Something about his face seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. He was studying me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, as if he was trying to remember something. "Thank you," he said when I handed him his scotch. His voice carried a slight accent I couldn't identify. "I'm Marcus. And you are?" "Bruce," I replied simply. "Erin's husband." He nodded slowly, that curious expression never leaving his face. Before he could say anything else, Erin appeared at my elbow, her smile bright enough to power the chandeliers. "Mr. Chen, I hope my husband isn't bothering you with conversation," she said with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "He's not really part of the business world. More of a support system." The words stung, but I was used to it. Marcus Chen's eyebrows lifted slightly, and I saw something flicker across his face. Disappointment? Surprise? I couldn't tell. "Actually," Marcus began, "I was hoping to learn more about—" "Oh, Bruce doesn't have anything interesting to share about business," Erin interrupted, her hand finding my arm in what looked like an affectionate gesture but felt like a warning. Her nails dug into my skin through the fabric. "Do you, honey?" I shook my head, knowing better than to contradict her in public. But Marcus Chen was still watching me with that strange, searching look. The evening progressed like a carefully choreographed dance. Erin worked the room with surgical precision, introducing her father to potential investors, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, and positioning herself as the perfect liaison between old money and new opportunities. I stayed in the background, refilling drinks and clearing empty plates like an unpaid servant. Every time I caught Marcus Chen looking in my direction, I felt that same unsettling recognition. There was something about him, something that tugged at memories I couldn't quite grasp. But whenever I tried to think about it, Erin would appear with another task, another way to keep me busy and out of sight. "Bruce, the centerpieces on table 7 are wilting." she whispered in my ear during a lull in conversation. "Could you ask the staff to replace them? We can't have Mr. Chen seeing anything less than perfection." I nodded and made my way to the service area, my footsteps echoing hollow against the marble. As I spoke with the catering manager about the flowers, I could hear Erin's laughter floating across the ballroom. She was in her element, commanding attention and respect from people who would never give me a second glance. When I returned, I found her deep in conversation with Marcus Chen and her father, Gerald. The old man was sweating despite the air conditioning, his hands shaking slightly as he gestured toward the contract papers spread out on a nearby table. This was it. This was the moment everything had been building toward. "The numbers are all there, Mr. Chen," Gerald was saying, his voice tight with nervous energy. 20% return on investment within the first year guaranteed. My company has the infrastructure, the workforce, the experience. All we need is a partner who understands vision. Marcus nodded politely, but I could see he wasn't convinced. His eyes kept drifting around the room, landing on me for a moment before moving on. Erin noticed, too, and I saw her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice taking on a harder edge, "perhaps you'd like to see the production facility tomorrow? We could arrange a private tour, just the key stakeholders." "That would be interesting," Marcus replied, but his tone was non-committal. "Though I have to say I'm more interested in the people behind the business than the facilities themselves. Character matters more than capability in my experience." Erin's smile faltered for just a second. "Of course, character, absolutely." It was then that disaster struck, or rather that Erin created her own disaster. One of the hotel's golden retrievers, a therapy dog that belonged to a guest with mobility issues, had wandered into the ballroom. The beautiful animal moved between tables, tail wagging, bringing smiles to faces that had been tense with business concerns. Children at the family tables giggled and reached out to pet his silky coat, but Erin saw only a problem to be solved. "Bruce," she hissed, grabbing my arm so hard I knew there would be bruises later. "Get that animal out of here. This is a business function, not a pet parade. What will Mr. Chen think?" I glanced over at Marcus, who was actually smiling as he watched the dog interact with some of the younger guests. He didn't seem bothered at all, but I knew better than to argue. "I'll handle it," I said quietly. I made my way toward the dog, intending to gently guide him back to his owner. But as I knelt down to pet him, speaking in soft tones, Erin's voice cut through the ambient conversation like a knife. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Bruce, if you're going to play with dogs, at least do it properly." The words themselves weren't particularly cruel, but her tone carried venom that made nearby conversations pause. I felt heat rise in my cheeks as I realized people were starting to stare. "Erin, please," I said quietly, still kneeling beside the dog who seemed to sense the tension and whimpered softly. But she wasn't finished. The pressure of the evening, the importance of the contract, the need to impress Marcus Chen, it all came pouring out in a torrent of words that would change everything between us. "You know what, Bruce? Since you're so comfortable down there with the animals, why don't you just stay there? In fact, why don't you go outside and eat with the dogs? It's where you belong anyway." The ballroom fell silent. 200 people, the cream of the city's business elite, all turned to stare at the woman in the emerald gown who had just told her husband to eat with the dogs. I felt my face burn with shame as whispers began to ripple through the crowd. But Erin wasn't done. "Go on," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "Take your dinner outside where you won't embarrass us anymore. The staff has already set up feeding stations for the service animals. You'll fit right in." I looked up at her from my position on the floor, seeing her face clearly for perhaps the first time in years. There was no love there, no respect, no basic human kindness, just cold calculation and embarrassment that I existed at all. Marcus Chen was staring at us both, his face a mixture of shock and something else I couldn't read. Other guests were pulling out their phones, some probably recording the scene for social media. Gerald looked like he wanted to disappear into the marble floor. I could have stood up. I could have told her exactly what I thought of her in front of all those people. I could have walked out with whatever dignity I had left intact. Instead, I did what I'd been doing for 14 years. I obeyed. I picked up my dinner plate from our table, the salmon and vegetables that had cost more than I usually spent on food in a week, and I walked toward the exit. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, moving without my conscious direction. The crowd parted before me, like I was carrying something contagious. The service area behind the hotel was poorly lit, illuminated only by a few security lights and the glow spilling from the kitchen windows. The contrast with the elegant ballroom was stark. Here, among the dumpsters and loading docks, the hotel staff had indeed set up stations for service animals. Water bowls and feeding dishes sat on rubber mats, practical and unadorned. I sat down on a concrete step, my expensive dinner plate balanced on my knees, and began to eat. The salmon tasted like cardboard, but I forced myself to chew and swallow. Around me, a few actual service dogs munched on their kibble, their owners speaking in quiet, sympathetic tones that I pretended not to hear. The night air was humid and heavy with the scent of jasmine from the hotel's gardens. In the distance, I could hear the muffled sounds of the gala continuing without me. Laughter, music, the clink of wine glasses, life going on as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something had broken inside me tonight that couldn't be repaired. As I sat there in the semi-darkness, eating my humiliation one bite at a time, I realized that this was who I had become. This was what 24 years of marriage had made me. I was still sitting there, staring at my half-empty plate when I heard footsteps approaching, expensive shoes on concrete, moving with purpose. I didn't look up, assuming it was hotel security coming to move me along. "Excuse me," a voice said softly. "Mind if I join you?" I looked up to find Marcus Chen standing in the shadows, his tie loosened and his jacket slung over one arm. He was holding his own dinner plate and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mr. Chen," I said, starting to stand, "you shouldn't be back here. The gala can continue without me for a few minutes," he said, settling down on the step beside me. I needed some air anyway. Too many people in there who think money equals character. We sat in silence for a moment. Two men eating. Expensive food in a service alley. It was surreal and somehow comforting at the same time. "You know," Marcus said quietly, "I've been watching you all evening. There's something about you that's familiar. Something that's been bothering me since we were introduced." I took another bite of salmon, not trusting myself to speak. "I keep thinking I should know you from somewhere," he continued, "but I can't place it. It's like trying to remember a dream after you wake up." The way he said it, the tone of his voice sent a chill down my spine. Because suddenly, sitting there in the dim light with jasmine heavy in the air, I was remembering something too. A young man, barely 18, struggling with textbooks too expensive for his budget. A scholarship that didn't quite cover everything. Anonymous envelopes with cash appearing just when hope was running out. But that was impossible. That was 26 years ago, and that young man had been named Michael, not Marcus. Michael Chen, the brilliant kid from the wrong side of town who'd wanted to study business but couldn't afford the books. I looked at him more carefully now, seeing past the expensive suit and the confidence that success brings. The bone structure was the same, the intelligent eyes, even the way he held his head when he was thinking. "Michael?" I whispered, the name escaping before I could stop it. Marcus Chen went completely still. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth and he turned to stare at me with an expression of dawning recognition. "Oh my God," he breathed. "You're him. You're really him." The silence stretched between us like a bridge spanning 26 years. Marcus Chen set down his dinner plate with shaking hands, never taking his eyes off my face. In the dim light of the service area, with the sounds of the gala muffled by distance and walls, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. "I can't believe it's you," he said, his voice thick with emotion I didn't expect. "All these years I've wondered. I've searched. I hired private investigators, posted on every social media platform, tried alumni networks. I never stopped looking for the man who saved my life. I stared at him, this successful CEO in his expensive suit, and saw instead the scared 18-year-old boy who used to sit in the university cafeteria, nursing a single cup of coffee for hours because it was all he could afford. Michael Chen, who had changed his name to Marcus when he started his first company, believing it sounded more American, more acceptable to investors. "You were so young," I said quietly, my voice barely audible over the distant fountain in the hotel's garden. "I remember the first time I saw you in the financial aid office. You were arguing with the clerk about your work-study hours, trying to figure out how to pay for your textbooks." Marcus laughed, but there were tears in his eyes. I was broke. Completely, utterly broke. My parents had sent me to America with $800 in their prayers. When that scholarship money ran out after the first semester, I thought I'd have to drop out and go back to Hong Kong in shame. I remembered that day clearly. I'd been successful then, riding high on a series of investments that had made me wealthy beyond my wildest dreams. At 37, I owned a portfolio worth $15 million, a penthouse apartment downtown, and a classic Porsche that I drove too fast. I was everything I thought success looked like. "You were crying," I said, the memory washing over me like a wave. "Sitting on that bench outside the administration building, holding a stack of bills you couldn't pay. I'd just come from meeting with my financial advisor about diversifying my holdings, and here was this kid who couldn't afford a $120 chemistry textbook." $187, Marcus corrected with a small smile. "Advanced Organic Chemistry, 3rd edition. I still remember the price. I'd been to every used bookstore in the city, checked every online marketplace, nothing." I nodded, remembering how I'd approached him that day. I'd been awkward about it, not wanting to embarrass him or make him feel like charity. I'd told him I was part of an anonymous scholarship fund that helped promising students. A small lie that had grown into something much larger. "You wouldn't tell me your last name," Marcus continued, settling back against the concrete step. "You said anonymity was a condition of the scholarship. All you'd give me was Mr. B. I used to joke with my roommate that you were probably some eccentric millionaire who got his kicks from helping random college kids. If only he'd known how close to the truth that was. But it hadn't been about kicks or tax write-offs or building my reputation. There had been something about his determination, his quiet dignity, even in desperation, that had reminded me of myself at that age. I'd grown up poor, too, working 3 jobs to pay for community college before transferring to the state university. "The envelopes," he said softly. "Every month for 5 years. Tuition, books, living expenses. $2,500 like clockwork. I used to wait by my mailbox like it was Christmas morning." "You sent thank-you notes," I remembered. "Every month, handwritten on notebook paper because you couldn't afford stationery." "I kept copies," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. He scrolled through his photos until he found what he was looking for, then held it out to me. It was a picture of a handwritten letter, the penmanship careful and formal despite being written on lined paper. "Dear Mr. B," I read aloud, "I cannot adequately express my gratitude for your continued support. This month I was able to purchase the advanced calculus textbook and still have enough left over for groceries. I promise you that every dollar is being used wisely and that I will find a way to pay this kindness forward someday. Your grateful student, Michael Chen." "I meant every word," Marcus said, taking the phone back, "even when I didn't know if anyone was actually reading them." "I read every one," I told him. "I kept them in a file folder in my desk drawer. Sometimes when business was particularly cutthroat or I was questioning my own values, I'd pull them out and remember why generosity mattered." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 men processing the impossible coincidence that had brought us back together. In the distance, I could hear the fountain bubbling and the faint sound of a string quartet playing in the ballroom. The contrast between this quiet moment and the humiliation I'd just endured was stark. "What happened to you?" Marcus asked suddenly. "I mean, after you helped me graduate. I tried to find you when I got my first job, when I started my first company. I wanted to pay you back, to thank you properly, but it was like you disappeared. I looked down at my hands, weathered and lined with age, holding a dinner plate worth more than I spent on food in a month. How could I explain the crash of 2003? How my aggressive investments had finally caught up with me? How I'd lost nearly everything in a series of bad bets on .com stocks and real estate ventures that had seemed like sure things? Life happened, I said simply. The market crashed, investments went bad. By 2004, most of my wealth was gone. Marcus frowned. But you kept sending the money. Even after I graduated in 2003, the envelopes kept coming during my master's program. That was another $60,000 over 2 years. I nodded. I'd made a commitment. You were so close to finishing your MBA. I couldn't let you drop out when you only had 8 months left. But if you'd lost your money, I mortgaged my apartment, I said quietly. Sold my car, my watch collection, everything I could liquidate. I took out personal loans at 18% interest. I figured a smart kid like you was worth the risk. Marcus stared at me in shock. You went into debt for me? For someone you barely knew? I knew enough, I said. I knew you studied until the library closed every night. I knew you worked 20 hours a week at the campus bookstore to pay for ramen noodles and bus fare. I knew you had a plan and talent and the kind of drive that doesn't quit. That was enough. Jesus, Marcus whispered, running his hands through his hair. I had no idea. I thought you were wealthy, that the money meant nothing to you. It did mean something, I said. It meant I was investing in someone who would use the opportunity wisely. And I was right, wasn't I? Look at you now. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. You sacrificed your financial future for mine, and I never even knew your real name. Bruce Henderson, I said, extending my hand formally. Pleased to finally meet you properly, Mr. Chen. He gripped my hand tightly, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Marcus Chen, CEO of Transcendent Industries, and I owe you everything. You don't owe me anything, I said firmly. You earned everything you have through your own hard work. That's not true, and you know it, Marcus replied. Without that scholarship, without your belief in me, I'd have been back in Hong Kong working in my uncle's restaurant. Everything I've accomplished, every success I've had, it all started with your generosity. I thought about the irony of the situation. Here I was, sitting behind a hotel, eating dinner with the dogs, because my wife considered me an embarrassment, and the man whose career I'd launched had become one of the most powerful business leaders in the country. Life had a cruel sense of humor sometimes. Your wife, Marcus said suddenly, his tone changing. The way she treated you in there. That's not okay, Bruce. No one deserves that. I shrugged, uncomfortable with the sympathy in his voice. Erin has a lot of pressure on her tonight. Her father's business depends on this contract. She's just stressed. Marcus studied my face in the dim light. How long has she been treating you like that? It's not important, I said, but even as I spoke the words, I knew they weren't true. It was important. What had happened tonight was the culmination of years of small humiliations, of being made to feel less than, of being treated like an inconvenience rather than a husband. It is important, Marcus said firmly. The man who saved my life, who sacrificed his fortune to give me a chance at success, deserves better than to be humiliated in front of a room full of strangers. He stood up suddenly, pacing a few steps before turning back to me. Your wife's father needs this contract, right? The $3 million deal with my company? I nodded, unsure where this was going. And your wife has been positioning herself as the key liaison, the person who can make this happen? Yes, I said slowly. She's been working on this for months. It's her chance to prove herself in her father's business. Marcus smiled, but there was something sharp in his expression. Well, Bruce, I have a confession to make. I didn't come to this gala to scout new business opportunities. I came because I saw your wife's name on the invitation list, and I recognized the last name Henderson from my old scholarship files. I've been hoping for 20 years that I might run into my mysterious benefactor again. My breath caught in my throat. You mean I mean, I came here specifically looking for you, Marcus said. And now that I've found you, I have an offer to make. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found what he was looking for. I'm going to call my assistant and have her prepare the contract papers for your wife's father, $3 million exactly as requested. All I need is your permission. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process what he was saying. Marcus, you don't understand. This isn't charity. Your company would be taking on a significant financial risk. Would I? He interrupted. Or would I be investing in a company connected to the man who gave me my start in life? The man who taught me that success means nothing if you don't use it to lift others up. He held out his phone, his assistant's number ready to dial. Just say the word, Bruce. I'll sign the contract tonight. Your wife's father gets his $3 million, her family business is saved, and she gets all the credit she wants. I looked at the phone, then at Marcus's face, earnest and grateful in the dim light. This was it. This was the moment I could give Erin everything she'd been working toward. I could walk back into that ballroom and watch her eyes light up when Marcus announced his decision. I could be the hero, even if she never knew why. But as I sat there, surrounded by the smell of jasmine and the distant sounds of a party I'd been exiled from, something inside me shifted. Something that had been broken earlier that evening when my wife told me to eat with the dogs in front of 200 people. No, I said quietly. Marcus blinked in surprise. No. No, I repeated more firmly this time. I don't want you to sign the contract. Bruce, are you sure? This could solve a lot of problems for your family. My family humiliated me tonight, I said, standing up and brushing off my pants. They treated me like I was less than human, and you know what the worst part is? I've been letting them do it for years. I've been so grateful that someone like Erin would marry someone like me that I forgot I had any worth at all. Marcus was quiet, watching me with those intelligent eyes that had reminded me so much of the determined young man I'd helped all those years ago. You want to honor the investment I made in you? I continued. Then don't reward people who treat others with cruelty. Don't sign that contract, Marcus. Let them face the consequences of their choices. Marcus nodded slowly, putting his phone away. If that's what you want, then that's what we'll do. It is, I said, surprised by the certainty in my own voice. For the first time in a very long time, I know exactly what I want. As we walked back toward the hotel's entrance, Marcus put a hand on my shoulder. Bruce, I have offices all over the world, and I'm always looking for good people, people with integrity, who understand the value of treating others with respect. If you're ever interested in a change of scenery— I looked back at him, this young man I'd helped become a success, now offering to return the favor in ways I couldn't have imagined. I might just take you up on that, I said. As we reached the door to the ballroom, I could see Erin through the glass, still working the crowd, still charming potential investors. She hadn't even noticed I was gone. In a few minutes, Marcus would return to the party, and she would approach him with her brightest smile, ready to close the deal that would change her father's fortunes. But the contract would remain unsigned, and for the first time in years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. The quiet satisfaction of choosing my own dignity over someone else's expectations. Walking back into that ballroom felt like stepping into a different world. The crystal chandeliers seemed brighter, the conversations sharper, the very air charged with an energy I hadn't noticed before. But this time, I wasn't the same man who had been humiliated and sent to eat with the dogs. Something fundamental had shifted in those 20 minutes outside with Marcus. Erin spotted us immediately. Her eyes lit up with the kind of predatory gleam I'd seen countless times when she sensed an opportunity. She glided across the marble floor, her emerald gown rustling with each calculated step, her smile so bright it could have powered half the city. "Mr. Chen," she exclaimed, reaching us with breathless enthusiasm. "I was wondering where you disappeared to. I hope Bruce wasn't boring you with his stories." The dismissive way she said stories made my stomach clench, but Marcus's expression remained perfectly neutral. Actually, your husband and I had quite an illuminating conversation, he said calmly. Oh, how lovely, Erin replied, though her eyes flickered with uncertainty. She clearly hadn't expected Marcus to find anything worth discussing with me. Well, I hope you're ready to talk business. My father has been so looking forward to presenting our proposal in detail. Gerald appeared at her elbow as if summoned, his face flushed with wine and anxiety. The poor man had been working this room all evening, schmoozing investors and trying to project confidence he clearly didn't feel. At 72, he should have been enjoying retirement, not desperately trying to save a business that was hemorrhaging money faster than he could count. Mr. Chen, Gerald said, extending a slightly trembling hand, I trust Erin has told you about our manufacturing capabilities. We've been in business for 37 years and our quality control standards are second to none. Marcus shook the offered hand politely. I'm sure they are, Mr. Whitman. Your reputation precedes you. I watched this exchange with a mixture of sympathy and growing resolve. These people had built their entire evening, their entire future, around impressing one man. They had dressed up, rented an expensive venue, invited 200 guests, all to create the perfect backdrop for securing this contract. And they had been so focused on their performance that they had forgotten the most basic human decency. Perhaps we could step outside to discuss the details, Gerald suggested, gesturing toward a quiet corner of the ballroom where several comfortable chairs had been arranged around a low table. I have all the documentation here, the profit projections, the timeline for implementation. That won't be necessary, Marcus said quietly. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Erin's smile faltered almost imperceptibly, but I caught it. Gerald's face went pale beneath his tan. I'm sorry, Erin said, her voice pitched slightly higher than normal. What won't be necessary? The documentation, Marcus replied, his tone remaining pleasant and professional. I've decided not to move forward with this partnership. The silence that followed was deafening. Around us, other conversations continued. Other deals were being discussed. Other lives were moving forward. But in our small circle, time seemed to have stopped entirely. I don't understand, Gerald said, his voice barely above a whisper. Have we done something wrong? Is there a problem with our proposal? Marcus glanced at me, and I gave him the slightest nod. This was his decision now, his way of honoring what I'd done for him all those years ago. The proposal is fine, Marcus said. The numbers add up, the projections are reasonable, the business model is sound, but I've learned something tonight about the character of the people I'd be partnering with, and frankly, it's not what I look for in a business relationship. Erin's face had gone white beneath her carefully applied makeup. Character? What are you talking about? I'm talking about how you treat people, Marcus said, his voice still calm but carrying an edge of steel. Specifically, how you treat your husband. The words hit Erin like a physical blow. She actually took a step backward, her hand flying to her throat. My husband? What does Bruce have to do with any of this? Everything, Marcus replied. You see, Mrs. Henderson, I judge potential partners not just on their business acumen, but on their integrity. And a woman who would humiliate her own husband in front of a room full of strangers who would tell him to eat with the dogs like he's something less than human is not someone I want to do business with. Gerald's eyes widened in horror as he realized what had happened. Erin, what is he talking about? It's nothing, Daddy, Erin said quickly, but her voice was shaking now. Just a misunderstanding. Bruce and I were just playing around. Playing around? Marcus's eyebrows rose. Is that what you call it when you publicly humiliate someone and then exile them from their own wife's business function? I could see other guests beginning to notice our conversation. The volume of nearby discussions was dropping as people strained to overhear what was clearly becoming a confrontation. Phones were coming out again, just as they had during my humiliation, but this time the spotlight was on Erin. Mr. Chen, please, Gerald pleaded, his businessman's instincts taking over even as his world crumbled around him. Whatever happened between Bruce and Erin, it's a personal matter. It has nothing to do with our business proposal." "Doesn't it?" Marcus asked. In my experience, Mr. Whitman, how people treat their family members is often the best indicator of how they'll treat their business partners. If Mrs. Henderson can't show basic respect for her own husband, why would I trust her to respect a $3 million contract? The amount hung in the air like a blade. $3 million. Gerald's salvation, Erin's triumph, the validation she'd been seeking her entire career. All of it slipping away because of a moment of cruelty that had revealed who she really was. "You're overreacting," Erin said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Bruce is fine with it. He understands that business comes first, don't you, Bruce?" All eyes turned to me. This was the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. For 14 years, I had been the enabler, the one who smoothed over Erin's rough edges, who made excuses for her behavior, who sacrificed my own dignity to preserve her image. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not fine with it." The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Erin's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, fear, and finally something that looked almost like panic. "Bruce, what are you doing?" she hissed, her voice low but audible to everyone in our circle. "This is not the time or place for this conversation." "When would be the right time?" I asked, finding my voice growing stronger with each word. "When you're not trying to impress someone? When there's no audience to witness your true nature? The problem is, Erin, this is your true nature. This is who you are when you think no one important is watching." Gerald was looking between his daughter and me with growing horror, beginning to understand that his business deal was disintegrating before his eyes. "Bruce, surely we can work this out. Family disagreements happen, but we don't need to air them in public." "He's right," Erin said, grasping at this lifeline. "We should discuss this privately as a family. Mr. Chen, I apologize for any discomfort this has caused you. Perhaps we could reschedule our meeting for next week when emotions aren't running so high." But Marcus was already shaking his head. "I'm afraid not, Mrs. Henderson. You see, this isn't just about tonight. What I witnessed this evening was simply the culmination of what I suspect has been a pattern of behavior, and I have zero tolerance for people who abuse their power over others, whether in business or in marriage." "Abuse?" Erin's voice rose sharply. "That's ridiculous. I've never abused anyone. Bruce, tell him you've never been abused." Again, all eyes turned to me. The weight of their attention was crushing, but also somehow liberating. For the first time in years, I was being asked to tell the truth about my marriage, my life, my reality. "She's right," I said slowly. "She's never hit me, never physically harmed me. But abuse isn't just physical, is it? It's making someone feel worthless. It's chipping away at their dignity one small humiliation at a time. It's treating them like they're lucky to be tolerated rather than loved." I could feel the crowd around us growing larger, more attentive. This was better than any entertainment they could have expected at a business gala, but I no longer cared about their voyeuristic interest. I was speaking my truth for the first time in years. "It's being told that you're embarrassing, that you don't belong in polite company, that your thoughts and feelings don't matter," I continued. "It's being made to feel grateful for scraps of affection, for moments when you're not actively being criticized or ignored." Tears were streaming down my face now, but I barely noticed them. "And yes, Erin, it's being told to eat with the dogs, because your very presence is so offensive that even animals are better company." The ballroom had gone completely silent. Even the string quartet had stopped playing, as if they too were transfixed by this unexpected drama unfolding in their elegant venue. Erin was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not frustration, but something that looked almost like fear. For the first time in our marriage, she was seeing me not as the compliant husband who would always back down, but as a person with feelings, with limits, with the capacity to fight back. "Bruce," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "people are staring." "Let them stare," I replied. "Let them see what happens when someone finally tells the truth about our marriage." Marcus stepped forward then, his presence commanding even in the midst of our personal drama. "Mrs. Henderson, I want to be very clear about something. The reason I'm not signing this contract has nothing to do with your business proposal and everything to do with your character. Your husband is a remarkable man, someone who deserves respect and kindness, not humiliation and contempt." "How would you know?" Erin snapped, her composure finally cracking completely. "You just met him tonight. You have no idea what kind of man he really is." Marcus smiled, and there was something almost predatory in the expression. "Actually, Mrs. Henderson, I've known your husband for 26 years. You see, Bruce Henderson is the man who saved my life." The confusion on Erin's face was almost comical. "What are you talking about? Bruce has never even mentioned knowing you." "That's because he didn't know who I was when we were introduced tonight," Marcus explained. "You see, when I was 18 years old, broke and desperate, about to drop out of college because I couldn't afford tuition, an anonymous benefactor started sending me money. $2,500 a month for 5 years, enough to complete my undergraduate degree and my MBA. Gerald's eyes were wide with disbelief. Anonymous benefactor? The man called himself Mr. B, Marcus continued. He insisted on anonymity, said it was a condition of the scholarship. For 26 years I've been trying to find him, to thank him, to repay him for giving me the chance at success that changed my entire life. He turned to look at me with genuine affection. Tonight I found him. Bruce Henderson, the man you just told to eat with the dogs, is the reason I own a multi-billion-dollar company. He sacrificed his own fortune to pay for my education, went into debt to ensure I could complete my degree, and never asked for anything in return. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat, the distant sound of traffic outside, the whisper of fabric as someone shifted nervously in the crowd that had gathered around us. Erin's face had gone through shock and was settling into something that looked like devastation. "That's impossible," she said weakly. "Bruce never had that kind of money. He was working middle management when I met him." "By the time you met him, he'd already given most of it away," Marcus replied. "The market crash of 2003 wiped out what was left, but he kept sending money to me even after he lost everything else, because he'd made a commitment and he honored it." Gerald was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Bruce, is this true?" I nodded, unable to trust my voice. The truth was finally out, all of it. The success I'd once had, the sacrifice I'd made, the reason I'd been so willing to accept Erin's treatment of me. I'd felt like I deserved it, like a man who'd lost everything had no right to expect better. "My God," Gerald whispered, "all these years we never knew." "Because he never told you," Marcus said. "Because Bruce Henderson is a man who does good without seeking credit, who lifts others up without expecting recognition, the exact opposite of people who humiliate others to make themselves feel powerful." His words hung in the air like an indictment, and as I looked around at the faces surrounding us, some shocked, some sympathetic, some clearly calculating the social implications of what they'd witnessed, I realized that my life had just changed irrevocably. There would be no going back to the way things were. The truth was out, and with it the last vestiges of the marriage that had slowly been killing my spirit for 14 years. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Hope. The ride home was the longest 23 minutes of my life. Erin sat in the passenger seat of our aging Honda Civic, staring straight ahead through the windshield, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. The emerald gown that had made her look like royalty just hours before now seemed garish under the streetlights, a costume for a play that had ended badly. Neither of us spoke until we pulled into the driveway of our modest two-bedroom house in the suburbs. The contrast with the opulent hotel ballroom was stark: peeling paint on the shutters, a front yard that needed mowing, a mailbox that tilted slightly to the left, no matter how many times I'd tried to straighten it. 26 years, she said finally, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear her. I turned off the engine and sat back in the worn fabric seat. "Yes. You had $15 million 26 years ago." "I did." She turned to look at me then, and in the dim light from our porch lamp, I could see that she'd been crying. Her carefully applied makeup had run in dark streaks down her cheeks, and her hair had come loose from its elaborate updo. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. I considered the question seriously. It was more complex than she probably realized. Because by the time I met you, it was gone, and because I didn't think it mattered anymore. Didn't matter? Her voice cracked slightly. "Bruce, you gave away $15 million to help strangers pay for college. How could that not matter?" I unbuckled my seatbelt, but made no move to get out of the car. This conversation had been 26 years in the making, and it deserved to be finished properly. "Because I was ashamed," I said honestly. "When I met you, I was 49 years old, living in a studio apartment, driving a 10-year-old car, working as an assistant manager at a logistics company for $45,000 a year. What was I supposed to say? 'Hi, I'm Bruce. I used to be rich, but I gave it all away.' You could have said that you were a good man," she replied, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "You could have told me that you were the kind of person who would sacrifice everything to help others achieve their dreams." I looked at her, this woman I'd been married to for 14 years, and realized that for the first time since our wedding day, she was seeing me clearly. Not as the convenient husband who paid half the bills and didn't argue when she made decisions. Not as the embarrassing partner she had to manage at social events, but as a person with a history, with complexity, with worth. "Would it have made a difference?" I asked. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I began to think she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know," she admitted. "I want to say yes, but I honestly don't know. I've spent so many years focused on climbing the social ladder, on proving myself in business, on being someone important. I think I forgot that the most important thing was right here, sitting next to me every day." We sat in the car for another 10 minutes, neither of us ready to go inside and face whatever came next. The neighborhood was quiet around us, porch lights glowing in windows, the occasional car passing by, the sound of a dog barking somewhere in the distance. Normal suburban life continuing as if my entire world hadn't just been turned upside down. "Marcus offered me a job," I said eventually. Aaron's head snapped toward me. "He what?" "When we were outside talking before he went back into the ballroom, he said he was always looking for good people, people with integrity. He offered me a position with his company." "What kind of position?" she asked, though I could hear the fear in her voice. She was beginning to understand that tonight's events might have consequences far beyond a lost business contract. "He didn't specify. But knowing Marcus, it wouldn't be entry-level. He's built his empire on the principle of surrounding himself with people he trusts, people who share his values." Aaron stared at me for a long moment. "Are you going to take it?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself since Marcus had made the offer. The old Bruce, the one who had existed until tonight, would have automatically said no, would have cited his loyalty to his current job, his fear of change, his conviction that he didn't deserve better than what he had, but that Bruce had died tonight, somewhere between being told to eat with the dogs and watching his wife's world crumble when she realized who she'd been married to all along. "I think so," I said. She nodded slowly as if she'd expected that answer. "What does that mean for us?" It was the question I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure, because the honest answer was that I didn't know if there was still an us to consider. Tonight had revealed something fundamental about our relationship, that it had been built on a foundation of inequality, of her assuming she was settling for someone beneath her station, while I felt grateful to be accepted at all. "I don't know," I admitted. "I think that depends on whether you can love the man I actually am, rather than the man you thought you married." "And who is the man you actually are?" she asked. I thought about that question as we finally got out of the car and walked toward our front door. Who was Bruce Henderson, really? Not the failed businessman who'd lost his fortune, not the grateful husband who accepted whatever scraps of affection were thrown his way, not the embarrassing partner who could be safely ignored at social functions. I'm someone who believes that how you treat people when you have power over them reveals who you really are. I said as I unlocked the front door. I'm someone who thinks kindness is more valuable than wealth and dignity is worth more than social status. We stepped into our small living room with its mismatched furniture and worn carpets. Suddenly, the modest surroundings didn't feel like evidence of failure. They felt like a choice I'd made to live, simply so I could focus on what mattered. I'm also someone who's been allowing himself to be diminished for 14 years because he forgot his own worth, I continued. And tonight, I remembered. Erin kicked off her expensive heels and sank onto the couch, her elegant gown spreading around her like the petals of a wilted flower. I destroyed everything, didn't I? You made a choice, I corrected gently. Tonight, when you were under pressure, when you felt like everything depended on making the right impression, you chose to maintain your image by sacrificing my dignity. That tells me something important about your priorities. She buried her face in her hands. I was so focused on impressing Marcus, on closing the deal, on proving myself to Daddy and all those people. I didn't think about what I was doing to you. That's the problem, Erin. You didn't think about me at all. She looked up at me then, tears streaming down her face. I love you, Bruce. I know I haven't always shown it, but I do love you. I studied her face, looking for sincerity beneath the desperation. Do you love me, or do you love the idea of me? Do you love the man who pays half the mortgage and doesn't complain when you make plans without consulting him? Or do you love Bruce Henderson, the person who has thoughts and feelings and dreams of his own? I don't know the difference anymore, she whispered. It was the most honest thing she'd said all evening, and somehow the most heartbreaking. Because I realized that I'd been so focused on being the husband I thought she wanted that I'd forgotten to be myself. We'd both been playing roles in a marriage that had become a performance rather than a partnership. My phone buzzed then, an incoming text message. I pulled it out, expecting it to be from someone at the gala, maybe gossip about the evening's drama. Instead, it was from Marcus. Bruce, I meant what I said about the job offer. I'm flying back to Seattle tomorrow, but I'd like you to come with me. See the company, meet the team, let me show you what your investment in me has become. No pressure, just an opportunity to see what your future could look like. Let me know. Marcus. I stared at the message for a long moment, then handed the phone to Erin. She read it twice, her face going pale. He wants you to go to Seattle, she said numbly. Yes. Tomorrow. Yes. She handed the phone back to me with shaking hands. What are you going to tell him? I looked around our living room, at the life we'd built together over 14 years. The books on the shelves, the photos on the mantel, the throw blanket Erin had bought on our 3rd anniversary. Evidence of a shared history, of moments of genuine happiness mixed in with the slow erosion of respect and affection. But I also thought about the man I'd been before I met Erin, the one who'd taken risks, who'd built something from nothing, who'd believed that success meant helping others succeed. That man had been buried under years of self-doubt and diminished expectations, but tonight had proven he wasn't dead. I'm going to tell him yes, I said. Erin's breath caught in her throat. For how long? I don't know. A few days, maybe a week. Long enough to understand what he's offering, what it would mean for my future. Your future, she repeated. Not our future. I met her eyes directly. That depends on you, Erin. If you can figure out how to love me for who I am rather than trying to change me into who you think I should be, then maybe we have a future. But if you can't... I let the sentence hang unfinished, but we both understood what it meant. Tonight had been a watershed moment, a revelation that changed everything between us. There would be no going back to the comfortable patterns of the past where she led and I followed, where her ambitions mattered and mine were dismissed. I need some time, she said finally. So do I. I went upstairs to pack a bag, my mind already racing ahead to tomorrow's flight to Seattle. For the first time in years, I was making a decision based on what I wanted, rather than what was expected of me. It felt terrifying and exhilarating at the same time, As I folded clothes into my old suitcase, I could hear Erin moving around downstairs, probably cleaning up the remnants of her carefully planned evening. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd worked for months to create the perfect impression for Marcus Chen, never knowing that the key to success had been sleeping beside her every night. But that was her loss, not mine. I'd spent too many years accepting blame for things that weren't my fault, feeling grateful for treatment that was actually unacceptable. Tonight had reminded me that I had value, that my kindness and generosity were strengths, not weaknesses. The future was uncertain, scary in its openness, but for the first time in decades, it belonged to me. My phone buzzed again, another message from Marcus. I forgot to mention, I've kept every thank you note you wrote when you were helping me through college. I'd like to show them to you when you visit. You changed my life, Bruce. Let me show you what that looks like. I typed back quickly. I'll be on that plane. Downstairs, I could hear Erin crying softly, mourning the loss of the life she'd planned, the future she'd been so sure was within her grasp. I felt sorry for her, but I didn't feel responsible for her anymore. For the first time in my adult life, I was responsible only for myself, and that felt like the beginning of everything. The flight to Seattle was the first time in 14 years I'd traveled anywhere without asking Erin's permission first. As the plane lifted off from the tarmac, I felt something lift inside my chest, too. A weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying until it was gone. Marcus had insisted on flying me out first class, which felt surreal after so many years of budget everything. The leather seat was soft and spacious. The flight attendant actually smiled when she offered me champagne, and I had a window view of the city shrinking below us. It was a small thing, but it felt symbolic. Rising above the life that had been suffocating me, one small compromise at a time. I'd left Erin that morning sitting at our kitchen table in her bathrobe, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. She'd barely spoken since the night before, moving through the house like a ghost haunting the ruins of her own ambitions. When I'd kissed her goodbye, more out of habit than affection, she'd gripped my hand tightly and whispered, "Don't forget about me." But as the plane broke through the clouds into brilliant sunshine, I realized that forgetting wasn't the issue. The problem was that I'd been remembering a version of Erin that had never really existed, a woman I'd imagined she could become rather than accepting who she actually was. My phone had been buzzing constantly since we'd left the gala. News traveled fast in their social circle, and the story of the evening's drama was already making rounds through text messages and Facebook posts. Some were sympathetic, others were clearly enjoying the scandal, but all of them wanted details I had no intention of providing. The most persistent caller was Gerald. He'd left 6 voicemails since midnight, his voice growing more desperate with each message. The final one, recorded at 3 in the morning, had been barely coherent. "Bruce, please call me back. I know you're angry with Erin, I understand that, but this business deal, my company, there has to be something we can work out. Please." I'd deleted them all without responding. Gerald's financial troubles weren't my responsibility, and his daughter's behavior had consequences that extended far beyond her marriage. Some lessons could only be learned through loss. Marcus was waiting for me when I landed at SeaTac Airport, standing near the gate with a sign that read Mr. B instead of my actual name. The gesture made me smile, our first meeting 26 years ago when I'd insisted on anonymity to protect his pride. Now the roles were reversed, and he was protecting mine from the curious stares of strangers who might recognize my name from whatever gossip had followed me west. "Bruce," he said, gripping my hand warmly, "I can't tell you how glad I am that you came." He looked different in daylight, younger somehow despite the expensive suit and the confidence that success brings. I could see traces of the 18-year-old student I'd helped all those years ago. The same intelligent eyes, the same genuine warmth that had made me want to invest in his future. The drive from the airport to downtown Seattle was like entering another world. Glass towers stretched toward the sky, their surfaces reflecting Puget Sound in the distance. The streets were clean and busy, filled with people who looked like they had purpose, who belonged in a place where innovation and ambition were rewarded rather than quietly resented. "Tell me about your company," I said as we navigated through traffic that made our suburban morning commute look quaint. Marcus's face lit up. Transcendent Industries started as a consulting firm focused on sustainable business practices. But over the years, we've evolved into something more comprehensive. We help companies transform their entire operational philosophy, from supply chain management to employee relations to environmental impact. He pointed toward a gleaming office building that dominated an entire city block. That's our headquarters. 12 floors, 800 employees worldwide, with satellite offices in Hong Kong, London, and São Paulo. We've worked with everyone from Fortune 500 corporations to small family businesses that want to modernize without losing their values. 800 employees. I tried to wrap my mind around the scope of what Marcus had built. When I'd known him as a struggling student, his biggest worry had been affording textbooks. Now he was responsible for the livelihoods of hundreds of people, shaping business practices across multiple continents. "The thing is," Marcus continued as we pulled into the building's parking garage, "none of this would have existed without you. That scholarship didn't just pay for my education. It taught me that success means using your advantages to lift others up. Every employee we hire, every business we help transform, every sustainable practice we implement, it all traces back to the lesson you taught me without even realizing it." The elevator ride to the 12th floor was swift and silent, but my mind was racing. I'd spent so many years thinking of myself as a failure, someone who'd squandered his opportunities and ended up with nothing to show for his efforts. But standing beside Marcus, seeing the respect in his eyes, I began to understand that my definition of success might have been too narrow. The executive floor was a study in modern elegance: clean lines, natural light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, artwork that looked both expensive and meaningful. But what struck me most was the warmth of the space. Despite its obvious cost, it didn't feel cold or intimidating. It felt like a place where good work was done by people who genuinely cared about their mission. "Bruce Henderson," Marcus announced as we entered his corner office. "I'd like you to meet Sarah Chen, my chief operating officer, and, more importantly, my wife." The woman who stood to greet me was petite and elegant, with kind eyes and a smile that seemed genuinely pleased rather than merely polite. "Mr. Henderson," she said, extending her hand, "Marcus has told me so much about you over the years. You're practically a legend in our household." "Please call me Bruce," I said, touched by the warmth of her greeting, "and thank you for having me here on such short notice." "Are you kidding?" she laughed. "When Marcus called last night and told me he'd finally found his mysterious benefactor, I thought he was making it up. He's been searching for you for so long that you'd become almost mythical in his stories." Marcus gestured toward a comfortable seating area near the windows. "Sarah, why don't you show Bruce some of the things we've kept from the early days?" She disappeared for a moment and returned with a thick folder that looked like it had been handled with reverence over the years. "These are copies of all the thank you letters Marcus wrote during college," she explained, setting the folder on the coffee table between us. "He's kept them since graduation, along with documentation of every scholarship and mentorship program we've created since starting the company." I opened the folder with trembling hands. The first letter was dated September 15, 1998, written on lined notebook paper in the careful penmanship of someone who understood that words mattered. "Dear Mr. B," I read aloud, "I received your first scholarship payment today, and I honestly don't know how to express my gratitude adequately. This money means I can continue my education, but more than that, it means someone believes I'm worth investing in. I promise you that I will work harder than ever to prove worthy of your faith in me." The letter was signed Michael Chen, and below his name, he'd written in smaller text, "P.S. I hope someday I can help someone the way you're helping me." "He kept that promise," Sarah said softly. "We've funded scholarships for over 300 students in the past 15 years, full rides just like what you gave Marcus. We call it the Anonymous Benefactor Program." I looked up from the letter, my vision blurry with tears I hadn't expected. 300 students? All selected the same way you selected Marcus, she continued. Not based on perfect grades or impressive family connections, but on character, on determination, on the kind of potential that might not show up on standardized tests, but reveals itself in how someone responds to adversity. Marcus leaned forward in his chair. Bruce, what you started with that first scholarship payment has multiplied beyond anything you could have imagined. Those 300 students have gone on to become doctors, teachers, business leaders, scientists, artists. They're changing the world in ways both large and small, and it all started with your decision to help one confused kid from Hong Kong. The weight of what he was telling me settled over me slowly. I'd thought of my sacrifice as a single act of generosity that had ended when Marcus graduated. But he'd turned it into something eternal, a cycle of giving that would continue long after both of us were gone. There's something else, Sarah said, pulling out another folder. Marcus has been tracking down other people you helped over the years. Apparently you were more generous than even you remember. She handed me a list of names and addresses that meant nothing to me at first glance. But as I read them more carefully, memories began to surface. Lisa Martinez, whose textbook bill I'd paid during my last year of financial stability. James Patterson, the veteran student whose rent I'd covered when his GI benefits were delayed. Maria Santos, whose lab fees I'd quietly handled when she was struggling to balance work and school. 15 people in total, Marcus said quietly. All helped anonymously, all struggling students who might not have finished their degrees without your intervention. We've been in contact with most of them, and they all have similar stories. Someone calling himself Mr. B appeared in their lives at exactly the right moment, provided exactly the help they needed, and then disappeared again. I don't understand, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. How did you find them? University financial aid records are more detailed than you might think, Sarah explained, especially when the payments come from personal accounts rather than institutional sources. It took our research team 6 months, but we tracked down the records of every anonymous payment you made between 1995 and 2004. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through a series of photos. Lisa Martinez is now a pediatric surgeon in Dallas. James Patterson runs a nonprofit organization that provides housing assistance to veterans. Maria Santos is a biochemist working on cancer research at Johns Hopkins. Every single person you helped has gone on to make a significant positive impact in their field. The magnitude of what he was showing me was overwhelming. I'd known about Marcus, of course, but the others had been smaller gestures, moments when I'd seen someone struggling and acted on impulse. I'd never followed up, never wondered what had happened to them after graduation. Bruce, Marcus said, setting his phone aside and leaning forward intently. Do you understand what this means? You didn't just change my life, or even 15 lives. You changed hundreds of lives, thousands of lives. Every patient Lisa has saved, every veteran James has housed, every breakthrough Maria makes in her research, all of it traces back to your generosity. I sat in silence, trying to process the scope of what he was telling me. For 20 years I'd defined myself by my failures, the fortune I'd lost, the marriage that had slowly drained my self-respect, the career that had stagnated into mediocrity. But Marcus was showing me a different accounting, one measured in lives transformed rather than dollars accumulated. Why are you showing me this? I asked finally. Because I want you to understand your value, Marcus replied. Last night I watched your wife treat you like you were worthless, and I could see that you believed her. But she's wrong, Bruce. You're not worthless. You're one of the most valuable people I've ever known. He stood up and walked to the windows overlooking the city. I've been successful in business because I learned early that the best investment you can make is in people. Not buildings or equipment or market share, but in human potential. And you taught me that lesson without even realizing it. My phone buzzed then, interrupting the moment. A text message from Aaron. The bank called about the house payment. Also, Daddy's lawyer wants to talk to you about the contract situation. Please call me back. I stared at the message, feeling the pull of old obligations and familiar guilt. But then I looked around Marcus's office at the evidence of lives transformed and potential realized, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: pride in what I'd accomplished. "There's one more thing," Sarah said, her voice gentle but serious. "Marcus has a proposal for you." Marcus turned back from the window, his expression earnest. "I want you to run our scholarship program, Bruce, full-time with complete autonomy over selections and funding decisions. You'd have a budget of $5 million annually and the freedom to help students however you think best." $5 million. More money than I'd made in the past 10 years combined, put toward the kind of work that had given my life its deepest meaning. "You don't have to answer now," Marcus continued quickly, seeing the shock on my face. "Take your time, think it over. But I want you to know that this isn't charity or misplaced gratitude. This is a business decision. You have a gift for identifying potential in people, for seeing worth where others might see only struggle. That's exactly what we need." I thought about Erin sitting in our kitchen, waiting for me to come home and solve her problems. I thought about Gerald's desperate voicemails and the guilt he was trying to heap on my shoulders. I thought about the life I'd been living, small and constrained and apologetic. Then I thought about 18-year-old Michael Chen crying on a bench because he couldn't afford his textbooks. About Lisa Martinez and James Patterson and Maria Santos and all the others whose lives had been changed by small acts of faith in their potential. "I don't need time to think," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Yes, I'll take the job." Marcus's smile was brilliant. "Really? Really? But I have one condition." "Name it." I looked down at my phone, at Erin's message demanding that I call her back, at the assumption that I would drop everything to fix the problem she'd created for herself. "I need to go home first and end my marriage properly. It's time to stop pretending that what Erin and I have is love instead of habit." The decision felt surprisingly easy once I'd said it out loud. For years, I'd been too afraid of being alone to acknowledge that I was already alone in all the ways that mattered. Marcus nodded understandingly. "Take all the time you need. The job will be here when you're ready." As the plane carried me back to my old life, I realized that I wasn't the same man who had left 24 hours earlier. I wasn't returning as Bruce Henderson, the disappointed husband and failed businessman. I was coming home as someone who had finally remembered his own worth. And that changed everything. The key turned in the lock of our front door for what I knew would be the last time as a married man. The house was dark except for the blue glow of the television in the living room, where Erin sat curled on the couch in the same bathrobe she'd been wearing when I left. The coffee table was littered with tissues and empty wine bottles, evidence of how she'd spent the 36 hours I'd been gone. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "You came back," she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "I said I would. I wasn't sure." She muted the television and turned to face me fully. "How was Seattle?" I set my suitcase down and took a seat in the armchair across from her, maintaining distance that felt necessary now. "Enlightening." She waited for me to elaborate, but I found myself studying her face instead. Even disheveled and emotionally wrung out, Erin was still beautiful. At 49, she had the kind of elegant bone structure that aged gracefully, the poise that came from years of careful attention to her appearance. But looking at her now, I realized that I'd been so focused on her external beauty that I'd never really examined what lay underneath. "Did he really offer you a job?" she asked when the silence stretched too long. "He did." "What kind of job?" I leaned back in the chair, considering how much to tell her. The old Bruce would have downplayed it, would have made it sound smaller than it was to avoid making her feel threatened. But I was done minimizing myself. "Director of Educational Philanthropy for Transcendent Industries," I said. $5 million annually to distribute as scholarships, full autonomy over selections and criteria. It's exactly the kind of work I was doing 26 years ago, but with resources I could never have dreamed of. Erin's face went pale. $5 million. Per year? She was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what I was telling her. I could see her mind working, calculating not just the financial implications but the social ones. A job like that would put me in contact with university administrators, successful business leaders, people of influence and prestige, the kind of people she'd spent our entire marriage trying to impress. "That's amazing," she said finally, though her voice sounded hollow. "When do you start?" "That depends on a conversation we need to have first." She straightened up on the couch, pulling the bathrobe tighter around herself. "About us." About us. I'd rehearsed this conversation during the flight home, trying to find words that would be honest without being cruel, final without being vindictive. But sitting here in our living room, surrounded by 14 years of shared history, the prepared speeches seemed inadequate. "Aaron," I began carefully, "do you love me?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "Of course I love you. Why would you ask that?" "Because I don't think you do. I think you love the idea of me, the convenience of me, the financial security I provide. But I don't think you love Bruce Henderson, the person." Tears welled up in her eyes. "That's not true." "When was the last time you asked about my dreams, my hopes, my fears? When was the last time you were curious about what I think about when I'm quiet, or what makes me happy, or what I want out of life?" She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. I could see her searching through memories, trying to find evidence to contradict what I was saying. The silence stretched long enough to be its own answer. "I've been invisible in this marriage," I continued gently, "not just to other people, but to you. You see me as a supporting character in your life story, not as a complete person with my own needs and desires." "That's not fair," she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. "Isn't it? Tell me, Aaron, what do you think I want most in life?" Another long pause. You want us to be happy." "That's not an answer, that's a deflection. What do I, Bruce Henderson, want for myself? What are my passions? What gets me excited? What keeps me awake at night with worry or anticipation?" She stared at me, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "I don't know." "I know. And that's the problem. After 14 years of marriage, the woman I share a bed with every night doesn't know what matters to me as an individual, and honestly, I stopped trying to show you years ago because it was clear you weren't interested." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our small front yard with its overgrown grass and tilted mailbox. "2 nights ago, when you told me to eat with the dogs, you didn't just humiliate me in public. You revealed something fundamental about how you see me. I'm not your equal partner, I'm your inconvenient burden." "Bruce, please," she whispered. "I was stressed, under pressure. I didn't mean it." I turned back to face her. "Yes, you did, maybe not consciously, but that's who you really are when the pressure is on. When it matters most, when your reputation is at stake, I'm the first thing you're willing to sacrifice." She was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking with the force of her tears. "What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? I am sorry. I'm sorry for how I treated you, sorry for taking you for granted, sorry for not seeing what an amazing man I married. I'll change, Bruce. I'll be better." "No, you won't." The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but they were true. "You won't change because you don't really believe you need to. You're sorry because there are consequences now, because I'm not just accepting your behavior anymore. But if Marcus hadn't been there that night, if I'd just quietly gone outside and eaten with the dogs and come back in when you snapped your fingers, would you be apologizing? Now?" She didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. "I've been enabling your worst impulses for 14 years, I continued. "Every time I let you dismiss me, every time I accepted being treated as less than equal, I taught you that it was okay. But it's not okay, and I'm done pretending it is." I walked upstairs to our bedroom and pulled out 2 suitcases, filling them methodically with clothes, books, and the few personal items that mattered to me. Aaron followed, watching from the doorway as I dismantled the physical remnants of our shared life. "Where will you go?" she asked. "Seattle, eventually. But first I'm going to rent an apartment here in town. I want to finish this conversation properly, handle the divorce paperwork, make sure everything is settled before I start my new life." "Divorce?" She said the word like it was foreign, incomprehensible. "Yes, divorce. Aaron, What we have isn't a marriage anymore. It's a habit. We've been going through the motions for years, pretending that convenience and routine are the same thing as love. I paused in my packing to look at her directly. When was the last time you were excited to see me come home from work? When was the last time you chose to spend time with me because you enjoyed my company, rather than because we had obligations to fulfill together? She leaned against the doorframe, her face crumpling. I don't remember. Neither do I, and that tells us everything we need to know. I zipped up the first suitcase and started on the second. This isn't about punishment, Aaron. This isn't even about that night at the gala, not really. That was just the moment when I finally saw clearly what our relationship had become, what it had probably always been. So that's it? She asked, anger creeping into her voice now. 14 years of marriage and you're just walking away? I'm walking away from a marriage that ended years ago. We just forgot to acknowledge it. I finished packing and carried the suitcases downstairs. Erin followed, wrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to hold herself together physically. What about the house? She asked. The bills? I can't afford everything on my own. The house is in both our names. You can sell it and keep your half, or you can buy me out if you want to stay. As for the bills, you'll figure it out. You're a smart, capable woman when you're not expecting someone else to solve your problems. I set the suitcases by the front door and turned to face her one last time. Standing there in her bathrobe, hair uncombed and face streaked with tears, she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, vulnerable in a way that might have moved me to comfort her just a few days ago. I'm not doing this to hurt you, I said gently. I'm doing it because we both deserve the chance to find real happiness. You deserve to be with someone who admires the qualities you're proud of, and I deserve to be with someone who sees me as a whole person, worth loving. I do see you that way, she insisted. No, you don't. But maybe someday you'll understand why I had to leave so that you could. I picked up my suitcases and opened the front door. The evening air was cool and sweet with the scent of honeysuckle from the neighbor's yard. Somewhere in the distance, children were playing in a backyard, their laughter carrying on the breeze. "Bruce," Erin called as I reached my car. I turned back to see her standing in the doorway, looking lost and broken. "Will you ever forgive me?" I considered the question seriously. "I already have. That's why I'm leaving." The drive to the extended stay hotel downtown took 15 minutes, but it felt like traveling from one life to another. I checked in under my own name, accepted the key card from a desk clerk who smiled and wished me a pleasant stay, and rode the elevator to the 4th floor with a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt in years. Room 407 was small but clean, with a kitchenette and a window that looked out over the city center. I unpacked my clothes into the narrow closet, set my books on the bedside table, and sat on the edge of the bed to call Marcus. "Bruce," he answered on the second ring. "How did it go?" "It's done," I said. "I'll be free to start the job in about 6 weeks once the divorce paperwork is finalized. I'm sorry it came to that, but I'm glad you're choosing yourself." "So am I." We talked for a few more minutes about logistics, when I should fly back to Seattle, what the transition would look like, how soon I could start reviewing scholarship applications, practical details that felt miraculous after so many years of living small. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet hotel room and felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, complete peace. No guilt about disappointing someone, no anxiety about whether I was measuring up to expectations, no weight of obligations I hadn't chosen carrying, just silence and possibility and the profound satisfaction of finally being free. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When I opened it, I found a photo that made my breath catch. A young woman in a graduation cap and gown, holding a diploma, with the biggest smile I'd ever seen. Below the photo was a message. "Mr. B, you don't know me, but my name is Jennifer Martinez. I'm Lisa Martinez's daughter. My mom told me that you paid for her medical school textbooks 24 years ago, and that act of kindness changed our entire family's trajectory. I just graduated from law school, and I wanted you to know that your generosity is still rippling outward. Thank you for believing in my mother when she needed it most." I stared at the photo for a long time. This beautiful young woman whose life had been shaped by a decision I'd made before she was even born. Lisa Martinez. I remembered her vaguely, a pre-med student who'd been working 2 jobs to pay for organic chemistry books. A small kindness that had seemed insignificant at the time. But here was proof that no act of generosity is ever truly small. Here was evidence that the seeds we plant in faith can bloom in ways we never imagined. I typed back, "Congratulations on your graduation, Jennifer. Your mother was worth believing in, and clearly she raised a daughter who is too. I wish you every success in your career." Her response came immediately. "Thank you. And thank you for teaching my mom that success means lifting others up. She's dedicated her practice to providing free medical care in underserved communities. You started something beautiful." I set the phone aside and walked to the window, looking out at the lights of the city coming alive in the evening darkness. Somewhere out there were people struggling, working multiple jobs to pay for education, wondering if anyone believed in their potential. People like I had once been, like Marcus had been, like all the students I'd helped over the years. Tomorrow I would start the process of legally ending my marriage, of dividing assets and signing papers that would close one chapter of my life. But tonight, I was free to dream about what came next. In 6 weeks, I would move to Seattle and begin the most meaningful work of my life. I would have resources beyond anything I'd ever imagined to help young people achieve their dreams. I would be part of Marcus's mission to prove that success measured in human potential was infinitely more valuable than success measured in personal accumulation. But more than that, I would be myself again. Not someone's disappointing husband or embarrassing partner, but Bruce Henderson, the man who believed in the power of generosity, who understood that dignity was non-negotiable, who knew that the best investment you could make was in another person's future. The phone rang then. Erin's number on the display. I looked at it for a long moment, then let it go to voicemail. Whatever she needed to say could wait until tomorrow when I was ready to handle the practical details of unraveling our shared life. Tonight was for beginning again. I opened my laptop and started typing an email to Marcus. "I've been thinking about the scholarship program, and I have some ideas about how we might expand it. For the first time in 20 years, I had work to do that mattered. Work that would honor the investment others had made in me by investing in others in turn. Work that would take the broken pieces of my old life and transform them into something beautiful and lasting." Outside my window, the city hummed with possibility. Inside my small hotel room, a man who had finally remembered his worth began to plan how to help others discover theirs. And somewhere between the ending and the beginning, I found exactly what I'd been searching for all along: the quiet satisfaction of choosing dignity over convenience, purpose over comfort, and love over the hollow imitation that had been slowly killing my spirit for 14 years. I was 63 years old, and my real life was finally about to begin.